Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Kasia Godleski, and I'm the Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement at Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York. We're so excited to kick off what we hope to be a series of webinars titled Walking Through Life with Ignatius. This first webinar will focus on spirituality and service, which is truly fitting as this series was born out of a collaboration that started between Lemoyne and our local Ignatian Volunteer Corps, led by my friend Linda Zimmerman. We then connected with the IVC National Office and asked famed IVC volunteer and spiritual director Kathleen Curtin, Lemoyne class of 1962, for her support. Thank you, Kathleen. I'm so glad you could be on with us today. To extend the reach of this program, we invited other Jesuit colleges and universities to partner with us, and we're pleased and grateful that 10 of them signed on, along with Alpha Sigma Nu, the Jesuit Honor Society, and CARE, which is the Center for Aging Resources and Enrichment. Thank you to all these incredible partners who helped us spread the word and supported us along the way. As a result, we have alumni representing 21 of the Jesuit colleges and universities, as well as many other organizations. Welcome to you all. It's so fun to see all the chat and where you're all Zooming from today, so thank you. A few housekeeping details. This webinar will be recorded, and the link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. Any resources that are mentioned during the webinar will also be shared in the follow-up email. Also, if you have any questions for our panelists, please submit them via the Q&A function that can be found on the panel of the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to address your questions during or at the end of our presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce my friend, Linda Zimmerman, the Director of IVC Syracuse, who will tell us a bit more about IVC, and then we'll introduce our moderator for today's event. Linda?
Thank you, Kasia, and welcome from the Ignatian Volunteer Corps. IVC connects individuals who are 50 and older with service opportunities in organizations serving those in need. In the spirit of St. Ignatius, those who serve gather monthly for prayer and reflection in order to consider where God is present in their service to others. If you are interested in learning more about IVC, there will be follow-up information in our final email. Now, I would like to introduce my colleague, John Green, who serves as the Director of IVC Philadelphia, South Jersey, and is the Vice President of Partnership Engagement for the IVC National Office. John will be moderating the discussion among our distinguished panelists. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Kasia and Linda. It's exciting to be here today with all of you. We have assembled a great panel of individuals who will share their thoughts and experiences of spirituality and service. We will be exploring the spirituality of aging and how we can deepen our experience through prayer and service in the Ignatian tradition. If our panel could turn their cameras on. There we go. Good to see you all. I'm going to introduce our panelists one by one and give each one of them some time to share their opening thoughts on our topic today. Then we're going to shift into some conversation. And as Kasia stated, I'd invite our attendees to submit questions for our guests in the Q&A function. So why don't we get started? Our first panelist today is Barbara Lee. She is a retired attorney, a former U.S. magistrate judge, and a practicing spiritual director. Barbara is the author of God Isn't Finished With Me Yet, Discovering the Spiritual Graces of Later Life, and Answering God's Call, a scripture-based journey for older adults. She's also a long-serving member of the Ignatian Volunteer Corps. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, John, and hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I loved the title of Walking Through Life with Ignatius. I began walking with Ignatius in 1980 when I made the spiritual exercises. I was a litigation partner in a law firm, very stressful life, 24/7 sometimes, but I managed to find time to meet my spiritual director once a week for 8 months and to adhere to the prescribed program of prayer. It sounds like a cliche, but it's true. It changed my life. The graces of that experience are still with me. what I learned about praying with scripture in the Ignatian tradition and Ignatian principles of decision-making have illuminated my life, both spiritually and professionally, ever since. Excuse me. Fast forward to 1998. I was retired. A friend of mine, who was a retired college professor, was one of the first IVC members in New York. IVC at that time was in 4 cities, and I think the New York group had 6 members. So I thought it sounded wonderful, and I sent for an application. At the time, I was spending a lot of time driving back and forth to northern Connecticut to manage the affairs of my 90-year-old mother. And when I got the application and saw that it contemplated a commitment of 2 days a week for 10 months of the year, I realized that I probably could not responsibly sign up for that. So I passed. My mother died in May of 2000. And a very short time after that, it wasn't even a matter of weeks, I got a phone call from the New York regional director. Now, this was 22 years ago. Nobody makes cold calls today. Anyway, she said that she was going through old files and she wanted to know if I were still interested. Notice the timing. I'm always telling my directees that there is no such thing as a coincidence. So she sent me a new application and I went away on a trip, and I was spending a lot of time on matters relating to my mother's estate, and I didn't get to it right away. She called again. How many people would do that? So I said, okay, Holy Spirit, I hear you. So I joined IVC in the summer of 2000, and I spent the next 16 years teaching English 2 days a week at an immigrant services center. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. So I was continuing to walk with Ignatius, along with immigrants who were trying hard to learn the language and the culture of their new country, and along with my fellow travelers on the spiritual journey. That's one of the wonderful things about IVC, is the sense of community that we have, sharing our service experiences and our spiritual experiences. Well, the Holy Spirit turned up again and started whispering to me that I should become a spiritual director. My first reaction was to laugh out loud. Go back to graduate school at my age? Are you kidding? The Holy Spirit was not kidding. So I spent 3 summers at Creighton University, which is a Jesuit school in Omaha that has a wonderful program for the international program for training spiritual directors. And so I continued to walk with Ignatius, and I walked with my classmates from many countries of the world, priests and sisters and lay people and several Protestant ministers. And I eventually became a certified spiritual director. In the course of my studies, I began to discern that maybe there was a reason, excuse me, maybe there was a reason for this late in life call that seemed so strange at first. And maybe it had to do with ministering to people in my own age group, retirees, empty nesters, people who had experienced various kinds of losses. So I focused on that, and I wrote an article entitled Aging with Ignatius that pointed out some of the ways that the principles of Ignatian spirituality can address the needs and the interests of older adults, one of which, by the way, is volunteer service, but not the only one by any means. And so the article was published in America Magazine. And very shortly thereafter, Loyola Press got in touch with me to find out if I wanted to expand it into a book. Now, if there are any writers out there, you're probably staring in disbelief because you know this is not the usual way that books, authors and publishers get together. But the Holy Spirit upends a lot of things. So this became my first book, God Isn't Finished with Me Yet. And I am continuing to walk with Ignatius, with my directees, with my readers, and today with all of you. So it's very clear that God is nowhere near finished with me. And believe me, God is not finished with any of you, no matter how old you are. Back to you, John.
Thank you, Barbara. That was wonderful. Our next panelist is Bridget Farrell Dunn, a chaplain at SUNY Upstate Medical Center, who also heads up the Schwartz Center Rounds, a multidisciplinary forum where caregivers discuss social and emotional issues in caring for patients. She is a graduate of Lemoyne College, where she taught as an adjunct professor in the Gender Studies Department. Bridget has been a grant writer, a campus minister, a development officer, and served 2 years in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Welcome, Bridget.
Thanks so much, John. Thank you, Barbara. You're a hard act to follow, Barbara. So I'm not sure if I can adequately do that, but I wanted to talk about the fact that I first heard about the Jesuits when I was a very little kid, and I asked my mother what a Jesuit was at about 5 years old, and she said, well, they're priests from New York City. And I mean, it could be that that's what I heard, but that's what I thought she said. But I always thought that was funny. And I did a project when I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, Mount Mercy Academy in Buffalo, and I had to do a project on a religious order, so I chose the Jesuits. And from then on, I was sort of just transformed. Actually, I had to go to a Jesuit college. I had to learn more about these people who were so dedicated to teaching their students that no matter what else your students learn, they should learn that they are loved, and that would be good enough if they don't learn anything else. And I did feel loved at Lemoyne. I felt cared about as a whole person, and that is the charism, or one of charisms of Jesuit pedagogy, is that the whole person, you're not just a brain, you're a whole person, you have a whole life, and that your education does not belong to you. And I think that philosophy led me to seek service when I was graduating. A little back up, I decided that I was going to double major in religious studies because something happened to one of my roommates. It was kind of violent, and not kind of violent, was violent, and there were only men to talk to. And I thought there really should be somebody in campus ministry for young women who've been through something, to be able to talk to somebody. And at that point, campus ministry was much more limited than it is today. Today, you see women all over the place. You see a lot of representation of different people. But then it really was primarily priests. And this field was coming up. So I thought I would do some service and then afterward attend graduate school and become a campus minister. Okay, here's where the Jesuits and actually some lay teachers came in too, because I never would have considered Yale Divinity School without the influence of the Jesuits at Lemoyne. And when one specific lay professor who was very motivated by Jesuit pedagogy also. So I was like, are you kidding, Yale? I went to this little college. Are you kidding me? And they're like, you don't know that there's a power in where you've been to school and what you've learned. And I apparently didn't. And I applied and got in. It was an amazing experience. Also, when I, just backing up a little again, when I was in Jesuit Volunteers, I was sent to Worcester, Massachusetts, working with homeless families. And then I worked with little kids in Camden, New Jersey. Right away at orientation at JVC East at that point in Pennsylvania. I met the smartest, most amazing people who were so dedicated to their faith and to learning and who had had amazing experiences. And they knew so much about the world. And I was like, well, how did you get like that? You know, and I wanted to catch up. I had to catch up pretty fast. So just the exposure to people who'd been from all over the place, who'd had all kinds of different experiences, who were mostly my same age. I felt really, really honored to be among them. And still, I did become a campus minister. I did go on from there to become a chaplain. I was a teacher for a while. I've had lots of different hats, but I think chaplaincy is actually my best one. And I get to see people. I think I apply what I've learned at Lemoyne and in JVC and at Yale to approach the whole person, to meet them where they are, and hopefully to let them know that they are loved no matter what else they find out. People find meaning in all different things. It's not, I mean, people, patients and doctors and family members who say, I'm a card carrying atheist. And I'm like, oh, okay. Tell me what helps you to get through this time in the hospital. Tell me what's getting you through this pandemic. And so people talk about what's meaningful to them. Just as an aside, I think this has helped me because I have a daughter right now. She's a teenager. I have two teenage daughters, and one of them right now is going through a serious agnostic phase. And she said, Mom, I bet you're disappointed that I'm not, as Catholic as you are and everything. I'm like, whatever that means. But she said, I don't know, I'm having a really big problem with that. And I said, honey, I just want you to have something to cling to when stuff happens, because stuff happens in life. So that's what I'm praying for. And there are other things that are occurring to me to say, but I think I'm going to let it go at that. I want to thank you, John, and thanks everybody for letting me be part of this.
Well, as I stated, it's great to have you here, Bridget, and we will get into some of this as we move along. But to introduce our last panelist, Father Jason Downer, and he is the campus minister for Ignatian ministry at Lemoyne College. He also provides spiritual direction, trained in offering the 19th annotation of the spiritual exercises. Jason spent a year as a mercy volunteer, worked in student affairs, and spent time as a chaplain in a juvenile detention center. He joined the Jesuits in 2010 and has lived in many parts of the US and abroad, but is happy to call Syracuse home for a while. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Barbara and Bridget, for those wonderful reflections. And thank you all for being here today. It's really great to be with you. I think I'll start by just offering 3 short stories that show how my connection with spirituality and service have grown and evolved throughout my life, starting from an obligation to community to pilgrimage. So we'll start with that sense of spirituality and service being an obligation. In high school, I went to a Jesuit high school down the road in Rochester, New York, McQuaid, and we had required service hours that we had to do. And I made those hours. Nothing more than that. I did the hours that were expected of me. And senior year, we got to go off campus during school. We got to miss a class to do those hours. It was just an obligation. I was doing what was expected of me. And the best part of that, what I remember, was having lunch at Wendy's with my friends after doing service. Spirituality was the same way when I was in high school. I went to Mass because my family expected me to go to Mass. Spirituality and service were an obligation. Moving on to college, it's where that transition from obligation, spirituality, and service became a sense of community for me. And going to Ignatius College in Buffalo, New York, I saw a lot of Ignatius folks in the chat. It's great to be here, class of '03. But that's where this understanding of faith being a community and service being a sense of a new form of community, and a reason why we're doing service is because of the community that we are a part of, building this kingdom here on earth. That's where it became to connect in really new ways for me, going on spring break immersion trips led by campus ministry to West Virginia or New York City. Those opened my eyes to new ways of service and how important community was to that. Mass was something really exciting. I wasn't going because I had to, but because I had a group of friends that I saw once a week at Mass. It was a privilege. I know there are some of you here that at IVC in New York. I did Mercy Volunteer Corps in Mercy Center in the South Bronx, which again, highlighted that sense of community for me as to why I was getting involved in service and what my faith life was rooted in. And then from there, it matured again into a sense of pilgrimage, and not a pilgrimage like we see in the Viking River cruises or those nice pilgrimages being offered to Rome where there's fine dining and some prayer going on, but a pilgrimage the way that I see Ignatius doing it in the autobiography, where it's rooted in paying attention to the inner movements, an opportunity of responding to those movements and having a conversion, and doing that over and over and over again. It's not one and done. And I think that's where this connects with this aging for me, is that we're all moved in different directions at different points of our lives, where those inner movements are going to point us to something new and exciting, something frightening at times. And we're always responding to those movements to lead us closer to God. And that's where this idea of service and spirituality is a pilgrimage, because it's ultimately leading us closer to God. And that is done in a variety of ways and in a variety of different moments of our life. So I look forward to our conversation today, and I'm happy to be here with you.
Thanks, Jason. That was great. I think as far as getting started with the conversation, one place that I wanted to start off with is the fact that one of the things that we all have in common is our commitment to a service corps. Bridget, you talked about the Jesuit Volunteer Corps in Camden and Worcester. I was a Jesuit volunteer in Portland, Maine. Jason, you were a Mercy volunteer in New York City, and Barbara, you're also in New York as a member of the Ignatian Volunteer Corps. How has your experience in a service corps helped to change or grow your spirituality? I don't know if you'd like to take that one, Barbara. And you're on mute. There you go.
I'm unmuted now.
Perfect.
Well, I think what I came to realize is that spirituality and service are really inseparable. It's very easy to talk the talk, but it doesn't mean a whole lot. And I don't think we mature spiritually unless we are reaching out to others in some way. And we can't all do the same things, but God calls us in ways to utilize our particular gifts, and we should place our gifts at the service of others. And that comes back, the grace comes back to us and helps us to advance spiritually.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. One of the things that resonated for me in our work together in creating this webinar was thinking back to how my experience of God was very external before I did the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. And it was in that year that I started to experience God coming from inside of me in the way that I served and directed my work toward others. And I wonder if that was a similar experience for you, Bridget, or if you were going through something different at that time in your life.
What I was mainly going through was really a sense of disorganization, and I needed to do something with myself before just kind of lockstep going into graduate school. And I since wanted to, I mean, since I did a lot of service in college, I thought, why don't I just spend time in JDC and figure out what I want to really do? And I had kind of an intense senior year or two. I was really hitting the books hard. I double majored. It was crazy to double major in your senior year, and I did it. And I thought, now it's time to apply this. And I'm not sure what else to address, John.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, but I think that just working with other people and having to kind of grow up and realize how privileged I was to have this education, to have an opportunity to think about these things, where people were homeless with children who've been kicked out of their homes, young moms with babies, people who lost everything. And for some reason, whatever reason, through drugs and alcohol or through abandonment by a spouse or parents, that they were in this situation that I had never been in. And I'd had family that supported me and cared, even though there are differences in everybody's family, but I would never have anticipated being in a homeless shelter myself. So
Yeah.
It was a different way to use my education to finally kind of, you were talking about aging, my Lord, just to kind of grow up a little bit and realize that it wasn't just, church is not just about going to a building, but we are church if we have to act responsibly based on what we've been given and be grateful, act out of that gratitude.
Well, yeah, and what I'm also hearing in what you're saying, Bridget, is that that commitment to service broke down a wall that may have existed between you and others, and that was a space where God could enter and change that experience for you. Does that sound?
I think that's really accurate. I think my heart was broken in a million pieces over seeing what was happening and just the dedicated people who were reaching out, trying to make it better. And so it did break down. It broke down these walls that I thought, church is not a cold place. Church has to be a community.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. How about you, Jason? Anything to add?
Sure, thank you. One of the parts of being in the Mercy Volunteer Corps that was so great for me was being at Mercy Center. I saw this intergenerational desire for service. Here were my friend and I, Jeff Crum, who were just out of college doing this year of service, living together in community. And there were volunteers at various stages of life, all in this shared mission of Mercy Center, with folks from IVC who had successful careers as lawyers or social workers, and were now using those gifts and those skills to help the people of the South Bronx. I knew nothing. I didn't know what I was doing. So I was looking up to these folks who were just guiding us, and we were working through this together. I was thinking today as we were looking at this, one of the common themes of that year when we'd have a ceremony was to sing the Circle of Mercy. I will not sing that for you today, but there's a wonderful line that's part of it. For the Circle of Mercy is timeless. It is spirit of life itself, which roots us in faith and lifts us in hope and holds us in God's loving care. And that's the intergenerational model of service was really important for me, because it wasn't just young people and it wasn't just folks that didn't have anything to do. It was people who were dedicated at various parts of their lives to this common mission. And I loved it. It really made a huge impact on me.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. One of the things that I'm thinking about right now, and I've been thinking about it since we came together to talk about the webinar, is the notion of, or the term service. And I have to say out of embarrassment that I often equate service with volunteering. And it's something that you separate out from some of the other things that you're doing in your life, and you commit a certain amount of time, and then you come back to some of your commitments. And what I'm hearing all of you say is that service is deeper than that. And there's a much broader definition, and that, you know, what we do at work and how we decide our career paths is in many ways aligned with service that we want to do. Whether or not we have families is also drawing on a service piece. And I'm wondering if we could speak to that a little bit, where you have found meaningful service in your career choices. I don't know if you want to get started with that one, Bridget. We talked a little bit about calling on you. I'm not picking on you. But you shared some nice stuff about being a chaplain in the hospital. And I think just like I can often equate service to specifically to volunteering when that's not necessarily the case, I sometimes think of chaplain in the hospital as death and dying issues, but it's much broader than that. And you talked about that really well when we spoke about it earlier.
Thank you. I wish I remember, but no, I think that it's because I think we talked about like end of life issues. And I think one of the things that we associate, and I am guilty of this, used to associate with, you know, the elderly, and that would be end of life. But what I've encountered is people who reach end of life at any stage due to something or other. And we actually had an incident. I got to be careful how I say things, but a child who was very young who passed away in the hospital recently, and he came in as a trauma, and it was terrible. And the staff just goes crazy when it's a little person, you know, and it's just not supposed to happen that a little person, baby or toddler, gets meets their death at this stage, you know, has a cardiac arrest at this age. And you kind of encounter the question of, why, God, does this happen? You know, and that's, at least that's what I encounter in that kind of thing. I was holding this little guy's hand and praying after, you know, all the interventions were done that were, you know, unfortunately not successful. But just holding this little guy's hand, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're just in God's hands now, you know, you just are. The suffering is over and you are now with God. And I, you know, it's just such a privilege to be able to go and try to be present and consoling with the staff, with this little guy's mom, who was very, very upset, of course, and with this little tiny person, you know, who passed away. You know, it's every day you meet people and you get to hear stories, and I absolutely fall in love every single day. I didn't anticipate when I went into this that I would just love the patients so much. I had no idea that that would happen. I actually met a man recently who had he had an accident. He fell on the ice in his driveway and hit his head, and he was, he had this subdural hematoma, very big injury in his head, and he was discovered though, and he, some people pass away in their sleep. He did fall asleep, but he woke up, and his daughter brought him to the hospital, and he was reaching for words, trying to find what he wanted to say to me, and I'm like, Joe, you just hit your head really hard on the ground, and he but he was I just loved him. He was so sweet. I just wanted, whatever God wanted for him, that's,
Yeah.
and it's amazing to put yourself in a situation with a lot of training too, to get to the point where you can break down those barriers and really try to feel into what a person is feeling in the hospital.
Yeah. And what you're describing, Bridget, sounds like you, like a calling, and so stepping outside of that terminology of your job or your profession, that you're feeling called to this work, which is where it intersects with service.
Right.
Jason, I wonder if you had something similar to share. I mean, I know you have some different stuff in your background. We talked a little bit about your work as a chaplain at the Juvenile Detention Center, whether that was a place where your own spirituality grew through the work, or you noticed that in the people that you were working with. I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
Yes, thank you, John. That sense of for me was that growing sense that sometimes service isn't always a feel-good sense of like, oh my gosh, I feel really great leaving this place. For 3 years when I was studying philosophy at Loyola Chicago, I helped out with the Colby House Ministry. I saw Deacon Pablo in there. I don't know if we've met, but I'd help out once a week at the Juvenile Detention Center in Cook County, which is not a place that you want to go. It's not an uplifting place. But boy, to be there each week and to sit with these young people from the age as somebody as young as 11 years old to up to 18, as they're waiting for trial, or some are there just for a couple of days, some are there for months. And you can have these extended conversations of just being with them, just spending time with them.
Yeah. That's very powerful. Barbara, anything you want to add to that? Maybe from your time as a U.S. magistrate judge? On mute.
Unmuted.
There you go.
Yeah, I'd actually like to talk about something more recent.
Okay.
I've always been aware of the difference between the service that people get paid for, like judges and doctors and nurses, and the service that people do as volunteers out of dedication, out of love. And I have to say that I always had a bias in favor of the volunteers who are doing this not to get paid. And my eyes were really open during the pandemic when I saw absolutely heroic service, not only by doctors and nurses, but by back office people in the hospitals, first responders, EMT people, grocery store clerks. Remember in the early days of the pandemic when there were no vaccines or anything and everything was shut down, but food is an essential service. And here were all these grocery store workers working, some of them long hours. So I think that it doesn't matter so much whether you're paid for your service or whether you do it out of love without recompense, but do you do it in a spirit of generosity and of connection with your fellow citizens? And that's one of the good things that came out of the pandemic, is that we've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think, that could be a whole other webinar in and of itself, is the work that we do to support our lives and to make sure that our livelihood is intact, and then the things that we do that are not connected to that. And I think that there's definitely some parallels and some ways to contrast those. We have a question from one of the attendees, and what she's asking is, how do any or all of you think or feel about St. Ignatius, think that St. Ignatius would react to the vast explosion of lay ministry? And making the point that St. Ignatius wrote the spiritual exercises while he was a lay person. Yeah, great, Barbara.
I think he'd be all for it, because so many of his letters were written to lay people and patrons and so forth. I was thinking at the beginning of this that here on this panel, we have 2 lay women, a Jesuit priest and a layman as a moderator. And I think 25 years ago, it would have been 4 priests. So this is the church of the 21st century. And I think it's all to the good. We're finally discovering the talents of so many lay people, men and women.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with Barbara, 100%. I grew up in the Diocese of Rochester. We had a wonderful bishop, Matthew Clark, who was so supportive of lay people, getting involved and taking leadership roles in the church at a variety of levels. I can't agree with Barbara more. I think this is wonderful movement of the spirit to keep the Ignatian tradition alive. It's going to be done by lay people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I knew Matthew Clark. He came to Yale to talk about his vision of church, and he also talked about how Rochester shaped him. You know, the cradle of the women's rights movement is right there in that diocese. So he was shaped by coming to churches and seeing altar girls, and he had never seen that before. And I just think that I've had some amazing experiences of church as a student, as a campus minister, as now a chaplain, as a teacher. And one of the things I've seen is this kind of shared vision of church as we go forward, as Barbara alluded to, in the 21st century and beyond, that it's going to have to be about sharing of power and of accountability and of compassion. And that's what makes a church. And that's what I'm hoping, praying for as we go forward.
Thanks, Bridget. I stay on for a second because I have a slight shift, but I wanted to ask you another question. You mentioned your daughters, and I'm thinking about how your experiences and the growth of your own spirituality influenced you in being a parent and trying to raise them in a way, understanding all the things that have been meaningful to you, but also giving them some space to become who they were going to become. What has that experience been like?
Well, my husband and I are both in not-for-profits. My husband runs the Community Foundation here in Central New York. And so we're both dedicated to service in our work, and they've seen that growing up, that we're doing well, but we're not really making a lot of money, and we don't have a private jet or something. Some of their friends around here do, and we're very privileged to have a good life, and that we've really worked to supply that to them, and we want them to be decent human beings, if nothing else. If they're going through this, well, it's my younger one's going through this agnostic stage, as I said. My older one, who has applied to some lay colleges and some Catholic colleges and one Jesuit college, Fairfield, where I really want her to go. But if you know her, don't tell her that, because if she catches on that I want something, she'll do the opposite. But they have a really kind of a neat dedication to social justice that I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's part of their character. Children are, they come into your life and they are who they are. You try to shape them, but they are who they are. And you have to get to know them too, just they give you this baby, but you don't know who it is yet, So my older one she's very determined that she wants to do something really good in her life, and that, there's injustice that she wants to, face down, and my younger one too, in her way, they both want to make the world a better place. We're so proud of that. It's not specifically religious, I don't think, but it's meaningful. Does that answer the question? I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think there's so many questions that have come in that I just have to say to everybody, I'm not going to be able to get to them all, but one person is asking about an effective way to begin with the exercises in our daily life of service, and having an Ignatian orientation in our work, whether or not that's, part of what we're doing. And so I wonder if anybody wants to share something about that. All right, I'm going to pick on you, Jason.
I am muted, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think my best advice for prayer in a nation way is just to begin again and again and again. No matter how many times you might get started or get distracted from prayer, just keep going back to it, and finding new ways, right? There are different ways of praying at different moments of our life. How you like to pray when you were a teenager versus when you're in your 30s or in your 80s, they're going to be different. There can be familiar styles that you like, but there can be ways that God is calling you at that particular moment of your life to pray in a new way. And the Ignatian exercises, they're wonderful ways of doing that. The Creighton website has wonderful resources for the exercises in everyday life, but there are a number of good books as well. The Ignatian Adventure by Kevin O'Brien is one of the formats of the exercises that I use. That can be done self-guided if somebody didn't have a spiritual director, but there are also good ways to connect with a director as well. The Office of Ignatian Spirituality from the Jesuits East Province has wonderful resources of how to connect with a spiritual director, both in person and, for those needing virtual experiences, virtual directors as well. But I would just say keep beginning again and again and again. If there's a desire to pray, that's coming from God. And it may look different than how you're used to, but keep trying to answer that.
Yeah, Barbara.
Can I add something? A number of parishes have had great success using an 8-week program called Meeting Christ in Prayer. It's designed for small groups. It's a shortened version of it's a good introduction to the exercises because it covers the major topics. And if your parish doesn't have it, look into it and get started. It's published by Loyola Press. It was originated by a priest and a layperson in Massachusetts, and it works very well. Meeting Christ in Prayer.
Barbara, while I have you on, I know that we're getting close to the top of the hour, and there is a theme in some of the questions about people interested in being faced with retirement, and what are the opportunities and challenges that are present when you're looking at retiring or maybe recently retired. And could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I could probably talk about that for several hours, but I'll try to make just a couple of brief points. Retirement is such a major turning point in most people's lives. So the first thing is to discern, if you can, when is the right time. Now, sometimes you don't have a choice, but people do. And it's really a time to examine how God is calling you in a different way. Now, maybe you are called upon to use some of the same skills and some of the same gifts that you used in your paid life. but maybe not. It might be something entirely different. When I joined IVC, I said, I will do anything except legal work because I'm retired. But we have retired lawyers in IVC who are advising the nonprofits. So some prayerful reflection, listening to what God may be calling you to do now. It may be some kind of volunteer work. It may be more prayer. It may be some form of creativity. So pray for the grace to hear the call and to answer it. That's the beginning, and then you take it from there.
Well, I'm also thinking about what you said earlier, Barbara, when you first heard about IVC, and then you had other things going on, and then you returned a second time and a third time. So sometimes listening to God's call has to do with understanding the persistence. You might get asked more than once. Sometimes
the call is a whisper, and maybe you don't hear it. And sometimes the Holy Spirit gets a little more aggressive. So, but yeah, the prayer is a two-way conversation. You talk to God about your feelings, and then you listen.
Jason or Bridget, anything to add in terms of folks you've worked with or walked with through that process?
One thing I'd just like to do is shout out for the Spiritual Renewal Center here in Syracuse. It's a wonderful place to have a opportunity to get together with a spiritual director or to find out about programs that are run out of there. I recently got to join the board of trustees, and I'm learning about all the things that not only the center has done, but wants to do in order to keep reaching out to more and more people. And I think the pandemic, we've talked about the pandemic and its good things, that, you know, the things that have come out in spite of all the suffering, is that we've had to figure out other ways to connect. And so I would just like to say that that's a resource, and I see all these people who are from all over the place, and you're welcome to go on the Spiritual Renewal website as well and find out what we have going.
That's great. Thank
Maybe
you.
I would just, sorry, John. I would just add real quickly, maybe not for folks transitioning into retirement, but one of the beautiful parts about being a Jesuit for me is that our final mission is to pray for church and society. We still have a mission, even though when we are no longer living in an apostolic community, we're still given a mission, is to pray. And so that's a service. Prayer is a very good service that is done for all of us. So in those stages, maybe when you're in quarantine, I had to be in quarantine for 10 days, can pray. I can't do active service. Prayer is a wonderful way of serving others and serving the church and the world. Absolutely.
And can be done anytime. So Kasha is on. That means we're getting ready to wrap up. I wanted to thank you all again. I've learned a lot, and I feel inspired in your presence. I also want to give a shout out to my local Philadelphia, South Jersey community who support me and make me want to go to work every day. So thank you, all of you who have signed on. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Kasha.
Yes, thank you, John. Thanks. So we are coming up on the hour, and I always like to respect people's time and this hour commitment. So thank you to everyone. And thank you to John, Barbara, Father Jason, and Bridget for being with us this afternoon. You're such an incredible group of humans, and it was really our pleasure to be with you. So, and thanks to all who joined us from all over the country. And I imagine we have some international folks out there too, who will certainly get the recording. So again, you'll be receiving a video link to today's program, as well as a list of any resources that were mentioned. I was taking notes, and I'll follow up with our panelists to make sure that we include all of those. I'll also include contact information for John Green for those that are interested in learning more about IVC. I'd like to close by thanking our partners once again. I'm grateful that we belong to this incredible network of Jesuit colleges and universities and organizations that are supportive, collaborative, and made up of incredibly kind people. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you. And please stay tuned as we look to build out this series and share the wonderful work of St. Ignatius and explore ways we can live and grow through Ignatian spirituality. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for spending this hour with us. Stay safe and be well. Thanks, everyone.